What's up, everybody? I hope you're all having a fantastic day. I'm Jacob with Very Good Knife Company. If you're new here, welcome to the channel. If you're coming back again and again, I appreciate your continued support. So these next few live streams are going to be just a little bit different, being that I'm probably not going to be as interactive and doing as much stopping and talking because I've just got a bunch to do. I got a bunch to do. And I want you to be here. If you want to watch along, great. That's awesome. So, first up, well, all we're going to do today is we're going to be rough grinding eagles. That's it. I've got, let's see, 9 of them left here to grind. And I'm just going to crack on into it. Brand new 36 grit belt. I got the spark bucket down here instead of the vacuum. We're going to run it hot and fast. What's up, everybody? I'm Jacob with Very Good Knife Company. Good to see all of you. You stumbled into me doing a grinding session. This is a 36 grit finish on an Eagle. These are dropping April 25th. What's up, outdoor analyst? Thank you, bud. So we're going to move over from the 36 grit now to the other grinder and do 120. And this is pre-heat treat grinding. Let's run it. There's 120, 36. All right. What's up, everybody? I hope you're all having a fantastic day. For those of you who are new in here and missed the last time I announced, I'm Jacob with Very Good Knife Company. I hope you're all, you've stumbled into me absolutely busting tail here on these Eagles. These things look awesome. I love a big old flat grind, big old high saber. Look at that. So these guys right here are ready for heat treat. You can see they're real thick at the edge. They're all nice and centered. Everything looks just fine. Beautiful. Just the way I want them. But that's not all. I got a whole bunch more of these. So let's do it. Let me spray these off real quick. And we'll add this to our already ground over here. 4 more. Now we got 8. Woo-wee. All today. That's not all. I already heat treated 4. Feeling good today. All right. Let's put a new 36 grit belt on here. I believe I already grabbed one. I did not. Let me grab one. Okie dokie. The platen is hot. All right. Where's my pusher though? Now, we're going to take them from this stage. You can see that grind line right there. One there. And the center line. That's what we're looking for. Take it from that to this. Right? We got 5 more of these to do. But I only get 4 to a belt, so I'll be leaving 1 behind. Okie dokie. one side. One more. So we've got 4 of them ground here. That's another belt. So you might have noticed that my tactics to taking big pieces off as I went kind of changed as the belt progressed into where it is now. And there goes the oven. Actually, it's been beeping for a while. I've heard it beep quite a bit. That is the first 4 eagles of the run. Let's go ahead and go get them out. Those are in the oven here. And they are in for temper round 1. Here's what they look like. That is temper round 1. So they go from the stage that they're in right now to that. They go through this quenching oil and that kiln. Pretty sweet, huh? So that was round 1 for those. Now I've got, oh, I don't need that anymore. You hush. Hush. Okay. Now, let's grind these last 4 on these 120, on this 120 here, and we'll wrap it up. my gosh! Woo! Golly, I'm tickled to death. Holy cow. That was... It's been a humongous day here in the shop. I just gotta say. Excuse my excitement. But this humongous run of eagles here, and I say humongous, there's 18 of those big ass knives there. And I've only got 2 left to grind. Only 2. Of course, I got a heat treat and finish grind, but that is a big, giant step taken off of me right there. This is only 4 of them. I just pulled 4 out of the oven for their round 1 tempering. And I have got a whole bunch sitting right here that we just ground. All right, get them dry. Get myself sprayed off here. Let's take a look at them all. Let's just go on over to the other table over here so I can spread them all out. How about that? All right, so like I said, only 2 more to grind, which is major. Major. I planned on having this done throughout the first few days. Did not think that I would get through this step today, but I did. So these are all ready to be heat treated now. Just like that. There's a dozen of them. Is that sweet or what? Now, they came from this. All right, here's my pattern. This is the bar stock that they came out of. Just like that. Last week, I cut them all out, made them look like this. Today, I got... this is ADCRV2 carbon steel. All of this has got to be heat treated now. They are all in this stage, super thick at the edge and 120 grit finish. This is pre-heat treat. So I have to do the video for this knife, the making of the eagle, because I did the hawk, I did the huntsman. And naturally we got to do the eagle, right? So I left this one in this stage so I can show all the steps to get to this stage. You guys just saw me do the beveling, and that is all I'm going to do on those today because it is 5 o'clock and I am ready to get on out of here. But I will show you. I have that one over there and I have this one right here. The belt really, 3 is plenty. 4 is pushing it, and it does 4 okay. So if I can get 4 out of a belt, verygoodknifeco.com. Verygoodknifeco.com. Check it out, bud. Check it out. All of these knives that I'm showing today will be dropping on April 25th. Here is, let me grab my glove because I know this son of a bitch is going to burn me. I'm going to think it's not hot. It's not hot. What's up, Steven? How you doing, bud? This is what they look like right now. These first 4, there's 4 of them here. And I just pulled these out of the oven from their first 2-hour and 10-minute cycle. Maybe tomorrow I'll show some heat treating because I've got, well, these right here, that is 1 heat treat. I do 2 in each container of oil. Each one of these have 3.5 gallons of canola oil, and that's what I quench in, and they will get too hot. The oil gets too hot. So minimum temperature for me is 118 degrees. Any colder than that, then they'll start warping, cracking, issues like that. So I have a digital thermometer. It lets me know when those oil tanks get to the temperature that I want them to get to. But 2 of those big eagles, it gets it not too hot for the next one, but the next one does not have enough. It's just too fast. So those are all ADCRV2. Now these are Nitro V Hawks. This is the little brother to and the predecessor to the whole Eagle. This is also designed by Gabriel of Last Huntsman Outdoors. See, there's the big one, there's the little one. This is the EDC version. All of these are in Nitro V. Bigger knives, doing heavier duty things, will suit better with that big crusty carbon steel. But these guys right here, with a higher hardness, about 62 and a half. I'll be grinding these maybe tomorrow. Maybe I'll grind all these tomorrow. I have to do them no matter what. But I've got 12 of these to do. So, and then I'm going to start cutting out all my Kydex and getting the little steps that always seem to hinder me right at the end of the run. Now, we've got all these handles. These are all handles here. And they're just two sides of 1/4 inch micarta. They are tacked together with some glue. And once I've stuck them onto a finished blade, I will tack them to a finished blade with a little bit of glue, drill the holes. This hole, this hole, this hole. For the Corby screws, I'll scribe out that template, and then I'll cut all the excess off, then I'll pop the scales back apart and flatten them. That is all. It's just a couple little drops of glue that hold these together. But in this stage, they have to be faced. And what I mean by faced is, see how the face of the handle is radiused? It's the same radius as all the rest of it. But we have to face them. We'll cut these flush, because see right now they're rough from that bandsaw. No big deal. We'll take them to the grinder. We'll do all of them. Now the Eagle gets front and back facing because it has that exposed tang. I actually have one on them. Speaking of, I brought it today because I was going to start making the video for this one. What's up, Aries EDC? This is my Eagle. This was the first, one of the first 3. The other 2 are Gabe's. One of them he has, the blue one, and then the other one got sent out to some YouTubers. Scav had it, the Blood Eagle, the red one, and then PBKG got it next. I don't know who's got it after that, but this one was mine, the green one. And I didn't really plan on keeping it, but once I sent the other 2 off, I was like, you know what? I didn't get to keep a Huntsman. I didn't get to keep a Hawk. So I'm keeping an Eagle, and I'm going to go play with it. And that's what I've done. I have absolutely abused this one. I've hit rocks with it, cutting out roots. That's not rust. That's all dirt. And I'm going to clean this blade. This blade has no rust on it anywhere. None. It's ADCR V2 carbon steel. People whine about it getting rusty and crusty. I have not done anything to take care of this. And my point is not to prove anybody wrong. It's just to, you know, get a better understanding for myself. Even though I've been carrying this steel for over a decade, and I think it's the best. But that being said, you need to know its limits, and I just wanted to really have a knife to show you what happens if you are lazy with taking care of your knives. I promise you, even though I'm a knife maker, I'm lazy with taking care of my knives. I'm very lazy with taking care of my knives, and which is why I used to powder coat my ADCR V2 because I just didn't want to take care of it. Thing is, if you carry them and use them all the time, they'll develop a patina, and then they won't rust as long as you keep a little oil on them every now and then, you know, give it a little cleaning. This one will rust as it goes along. All that stuff that's on it, that chlorophyll from trees, that sap, that's what all that is. It's not rust, just, this is dirt right here. Mud from chopping into the ground, trying to cut out small trees and making trails. And that's where I damaged the edge at. I damaged it up here, I damaged it right here, and right here. Now you're looking at it going, well, I don't see much. You can definitely see that one right there. But this one, not much, and this one, not much. Those were direct hits on a rock, clink, and I knew what it was, didn't care. But I'm gonna show this one at the front of the video when I do the testing video for this. I just want to demonstrate it and show it, because I haven't done one of those in a long time. But again, I have to do the making of for that one. And I'll be getting on that this week. This one and the other one that is in the blank form, the non-blank form, which I will have caught up to this when I do the video, as I do the video. We'll get ground with this one, and then everything will be ready for heat treat. So I'm excited because I get to come in tomorrow instead of grinding like I did this morning. I'll just be able to start coating those blades with anti-scale, stuff them in the kiln, and start running them. I used to run 2 hot plates for my oil heater here, but one of them shit the bed on me a while back and I never replaced it. However, starting this Eagle Run today, I was like, this is not going to work. I need my other oil heater so I can run 2 tanks. So like I said, I get 2 to a quench in those 3 gallons. Yes, 2 of them heat the oil up too much to do a third for it to be right for the heat treat. But I had the missus go pick me up another hot plate so I can run 2 tanks. But anyhow, oh boy. So there you have it, guys. A little bit of grinding on these Eagles, a lot of grinding. And we have gotten them to the rough grind or a preheat treat grind stage. And that is where they are right now. Pretty dang sweet, right? Because they look really good. Honestly, if you're just to leave that 120 finish on there, it would be okay. They would rust faster, though, because a little bit more porous of a finish means they'll hold moisture more, and that carbon steel does not like that. So I hate to leave all of you guys with as many people as in the room right now. If you are new to the channel, I'm Jacob with Very Good Knife Company. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. You've stumbled into me closing out the show for the day, but if you enjoy seeing knife content and a whole bunch of sparks go flying, do hit that subscribe button and that notification bell will let you know when I go live again. Also, hit that thumbs up. It really helps us out. Guys, I appreciate your support no matter how big or small. I will see you on the next one, definitely tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.